Shout out Wick. I am subscribed, not subscribed plus though. Another reaction. I'm gonna react to the woke life versus woke right versus woke center. I don't know what this debate is about, but I am curious. I've been on one of Wick's panels. I just haven't had the time to go up on going on any other. Real quick, let me see if I can find the panel that I was on. Beam bop, beam bop, beam bop, bam. Damn. I just listened to this one Kendrick Lamar song, and now it's just stuck in my head. Ugh. Top left.
Welcome one and all to yet another episode of Wick TV, cross ideological space
Bro, look at my facial hair. Look at my hair, bro.
where we come together to talk about issues political and cultural.
I had so much hair. I feel like I'm going bald. Looking at my hair then versus looking at my hair now, I think I'm going bald.
Serious?
And enforcing it pretty strongly. So even
two white women talk to a black man and a frog. Yeah, I basically made the argument that there's no value of using the N-word, although it doesn't violate freedom of speech necessarily, nor do I have the kind of loaded anger and emotional tied to the word inherently. The value of using the word to express a certain level of freedom of speech is irrelevant and has no value. Honestly, it's just edgy talk is my basic premise. There's no value of using the N-word unless you're trying to be edgy. Put it very simply. So I don't know why people want to use it unless they're being racist or just edgy. The whole freedom of speech argument, I'm not buying it personally.
Who are you? What do you do? Why should we listen to you?
Future discrimination.
You want ads that drive?
Doop bop, boop bop, bam. I'm not watching your ad, Wick. Sorry. I don't care about openings.
Grievances, for his case, racial grievances in the past, and the way to remedy them is to attack the most foundational classical liberal value, which everyone as an individual. He would jettison that because of a grievance. That's, to me, the definition of woke.
What about you, Jung? Or Paul, get in on this. What do you think?
The definition is much simpler. Forget the classical liberalism. A woke person is someone who uses identity politics to silence other people. I.e., Douglas Murray saying we can't criticize Israel because it might foster anti-Semitism. I.e., the far left saying we can't criticize, like black culture because racists criticize the elements of black culture. That's the relevant, simple, important fact that characterizes wokeness. Attacking liberalism, it's like, okay, religious Christianity is against classical liberalism, depending on what strain you believe in. So I don't think it has to do the attacks on classical liberalism. If you call that woke, you're way using the label too much. Woke refers to a type of person who says you can't or you shouldn't talk about this because it might hurt people and their feelings or something like that. And that is what the real woke right does when it comes to Israel. Don't criticize Israel because of all the history of anti-Semitism, and you might sound like an anti-Semite, and all the things that Douglas Murray said to Dave Smith, particularly in the very end of their conversation when Dave Smith brought up
wokeness is gatekeeping based off identity politics. I think that's an easy way to understand it. More than likely. Gatekeeping based off identity politics. I think the crux of it, at the end of the day, is kind of a tribal moral superiority based off how people feel is another aspect that I would include in the conversation of wokeness. So trying to open up your mind to accept another perspective, but also denying another way to engage with that perspective is another aspect as well.
Steve, what was this? Something Wolfowitz, Paul Wolfowitz, and Dick Pearl, and Douglas Murray was like, it's weird that you're bringing up Jewish last names when you're criticizing Israel. It's like textbook woke identity politics.
I think your definition misses the mark, and the reason it does is it focuses on a really, really specific behavior, and it leaves a lot of stuff that I think would be textbook woke on the cutting room floor.
Okay, like what?
You know who Eli Mistal is? If you don't, good for you. No one should know who he is. He's a commentator on a lawyer, and he went to a fantastic school, and often articulates racial grievances. And famously, he once said the following. In March 2022, he said the United States Constitution is actually trash, pointing to things like the Fugitive Slave Clause and the Three-Fifths Compromise. Yeah, he said, quote, "We act like this thing was etched in stone by the finger of God, when actually it was hotly contested and debated, scrawled out over a couple of weeks in the summer of Philadelphia in 1787, with a bunch of rich white politicians making deals with each other." Now, he's not attempting to silence anyone about anything.
Sure.
But to me, that's very woke. You're saying the Constitution of the United States is trash
Yeah.
because of racial grievances that you're advocating.
If I said to you, the Constitution is not sacred and it was not etched in stone, and the idea that we hold it sacred is foolish, would that make me woke? Because I believe that.
Not by itself. It makes you wrong, but not woke.
That's fine, but not woke.
If you said
So he just went overboard
the
on it.
Constitution is trash because it allowed white people to be replaced, now you're woke.
The
Because
Constitution is
because you're partnering a racial or identitarian grievance with an attack on classical liberal values. You have to do both.
so.
Can I give you just one other example? Because I know
Your mic's a little woke right now, by the way.
yeah,
You know,
I've talked to a bunch of like Christian nationalists.
Yeah, hold on, real quick. Ryan, for your microphone, do you want to try just going into the audio settings, voice settings?
Yeah, his thing's peaking a little bit. I understand the premise he's referring to, an attack on classical liberalism. In favor of identity politics. I mean, I feel like they all can kind of coincide with one another, right? It doesn't really have any, it's not really a value term at this point where it has a concrete definition, more of a concrete characterization. So, well, we'll see. We'll see what
And
they
turn
do
off
there.
the input sensitivity, automatically determine input sensitivity.
a disaster. But are we back, gang? Can you see us?
It's live, I can see it.
For Twitch to catch up. Twitch is behind. Oh, now we're back. Okay, welcome. We're back, baby. We're back. I don't know why that happens, but every once in a while it will happen. Usually once a show at
Zog,
some point. Yes. But at what point did I cut out?
when you said you were agreeing with me on something, but I don't know what.
Nothing.
I don't think that's what I was saying. I think that you're
Okay, I don't know then.
I think that you were correct in that wokeness is often used as a tool to silence people, right? To violate their First Amendment, right? Violate their free speech, more correctly put.
Yeah.
However, I think that's not all it does. I think that it's merely one aspect of a wider range of behaviors. I think that I would best describe it, and I might part from Ryan on this, is I don't think woke is so much belief as it is a set of behaviors. It's a way of doing things, right? It's doing cancel culture, right? And engaging in kind of like...
So Wick basically, Wick is following with my process of thinking, where I think of it more of a characterization versus a definition, or a term with a definition. It's more of a descriptive term. I mean, descriptive terms can have definitions as well, but it doesn't have a solid definition. It's not something that is applied universally to actions that you can always correlate or antiquate to each other. So I think I for the most part, I'm kind of here. I feel like all of them relate to what we are talking about.
this victimization game of...
Summer savings are here at Going Gone by Dick's.
Do I need to get YouTube TV, bro? Not YouTube TV. Do I need to get YouTube Premium? Because I stopped paying for it and I already regret it. I might have to go get YouTube Premium again.
Straight white men are the most oppressed class in America now, that feminism has attacked it, and so therefore we have to deport all the minorities that they've bust in from Mexico, and we got to deport them by limiting their free speech. And if they write something critical about Israel, we ship them off and we ship them out, which we're seeing now. I think that would be...
Yeah, hold on. Can we?
behavior.
Okay, that I see it like that. I don't. Earlier, Ryan, you said, because I said basically woke is when you use identity politics, racial, sexual, whatever, to silence people or to beat them over the head or to rhetorically abuse them, whatever. Cancel culture, you can put it in that category, I guess. Can you give me an example of a behavior that is woke? I don't understand how that is not the primary thing we're talking about. What's an example of a behavior that you would consider woke that doesn't have that?
There are people in the Christian nationalist sphere now
Yeah.
who will invoke feminism to say that women should no longer have the right to vote.
That's identity politics, yeah?
Okay, so what do you have? Well, that's one of the two things I said. You have an identitarian grievance, justifying an attack on classically liberal values. They're not actually saying, hey, you should shut up, or you shouldn't be heard, or you shouldn't be able to speak. They're saying you shouldn't be able to vote. It's very different than trying to say, you shouldn't be able to talk about men's or women's issues. It's a much more foundational attack on like the right to be an individual in society. Similarly, on the left-hand side, Ibram X. Kendi famously called for a constitutional amendment, which, if obviously it's never going to happen, thank God, but he wanted to create a.
I feel like wokeism has a baseline of opening up a way of thinking beyond the status quo. I think that is kind of like where it starts, and then it just goes to crazy directions, right? For example, a society that was mainly very white and oppressive of minorities, the woke mindset realized that this kind of way of thinking and this kind of societal structure is not a reality. It's not the truth of the world. Black people and minorities and women, they can be just as good, just as valuable, should be treated just like all the old white men, right? So in that context, you can say he's woke because he awoken from a status quo that was very problematic in society. Now you have to sparse between a valuable woke mindset that is beneficial for society and understanding the world versus crazy thinking that wants to destroy the status quo because they do not like how it currently is. There is definitely a sparse between the two. And that's why a lot of the people that are being looked at right now follow in this category, the ones that are trying to destroy society. So that I feel like it started from there. It kind of became what it is now, and that's kind of just my
in the government, which if they ever saw more than a 5% disparity between any group of people on any metric, would have the power to go into society and fix that. Whatever means would be.
Yeah, that's nonsense.
Obviously, crazy nonsense. Obviously, very woke. And what the reason I'm bringing these up is that these are beyond the ambit of just like, are you trying to shame someone so that they don't talk publicly?
Oh, okay, well, I see.
It's part of it, but it goes beyond that.
So you don't think that Douglas Murray is woke, right?
No, I don't think Douglas Murray's woke, right. I think he supports classical liberal values.
Okay, hold on.
But I do think he has an axe to grind. Yeah.
When Douglas Murray implies that Dave Smith is fomenting anti-Semitism because he mentioned someone with the last name, a Jewish last name, how is that not functionally the exact same as, what was his name, Eli Steele? I think I do know who you're talking about, actually. He has gray hair.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe not.
Yeah.
Whatever. How is it different from a woke black person saying, it's interesting that you criticized that if I'm criticizing Kamala Harris, and then they say, it's interesting that you're criticizing Kamala Harris, a black woman. I just find it interesting. It's a little weird that you're doing that. The implication being that my criticism is because she's black and not because she's incompetent. That's exactly what Douglas Murray did on the Dave Smith podcast.
I haven't seen that. You were on the Dave Smith podcast? I saw the Rogan.
Excuse me, the Joe Rogan podcast. Yeah, sorry, with Dave Smith. The Joe Rogan podcast with Dave Smith. That is textbook woke behavior. And if your definition precludes that behavior, then I don't think it's a very good definition. Because I would say the most fundamental thing that I'm concerned about, and I think we should be concerned about when it comes to the discourse, is freedom of speech, freedom to articulate whatever ideas we have, no matter how harmful people think they are. And the principal danger of woke is a form of soft censorship, which is that you can't criticize black people because they're black, even if they happen to be incompetent individuals. You can't criticize Jews because they're Jews, because of the history of anti-Semitism. It's like, no, that's woke, and that's far more relevant, I think, than also having the element of attacking classical liberalism, because who cares? Why can't you just attack classical? People can attack classical liberalism because they don't like classical liberalism. I think neoliberalism is mid. I think liberalism is not all that great. I think democracy is the best tool that we have, but it's certainly not sacred. And democracy, as we understand it, where it's like, well, I'd say the electoral.
But I think my thing with what he's saying here, though, is that I do think it does not leave enough room for the realization that there is a potential link towards a criticism of an identity and using that identity as a conclusion to criticize a entire political position. Um, so someone like, you know, that hates Jews like Candace Owens, she can go like, "Hey man, Israel, they're terrible people." And obviously, you could look at some of the things they've been doing recently for sure. But then you can also elicit that her conclusion comes from the fact that she thinks that Jewish people are evil. So, two things can be true. And it wouldn't necessarily be woke to say that her thinking Israel's evil is because she hates Jews, not because of what they're doing. I'm just using that as an example so people can understand where I'm coming from. So I do think it needs that extra element of that kind of irrationality or irrationality. Maybe it is a dismissive attack on classical liberalism, like what Ryan is referring to. That is very possible. But I do think it is an important part of the conversation that there is an extra element after the identity politics.
College is not very democratic. I think the Supreme Court, we have 9 people unelected, appointed basically by random chance of whoever happens to be dead during a given president's term, that those 9 people in a 5-4 decision can determine the fate of an entire democracy. Probably not perfect. Now, does that make me woke? No, because like you said, it has to have the racial element. But then the racial element and the identity politics element, not the racial, but the identity politics element, that's the key thing when people are complaining about wokeism.
Life's better when you're under our roof.
I feel like you can also attach I'm trying to feel like I'm gonna let them continue while I work this out in my head.
He's got a bunch of stuff, so I'm gonna try to go after it, but I'm not sure I'm gonna get it in the right order.
Okay, all right. That's fine.
I think the first thing is if you don't hold classical liberal values, and by the way, I'm saying classical liberal, not liberalism, not left-right liberals, like classic liberalism, meaning like, for example,
Judeo-Christian. Judeo-Christian is what I would
close,
call it.
actually. Like the idea that like your rights are not given to you by the government; they are inherited because you are in the image of God. They are natural law.
Correct.
Your rights are not given to you; you have them. The government can take them away, but you can't. But they can't give it to you. That kind of old school classical liberalism is what, for example, makes me an originalist. So I'm not talking about like I think we might be using the term slightly different. So we'll start just to clear that up. And then I do think if you don't hold that sacred, why would you give a shit about free speech? That's a classical liberal value. Like the only reason you should care about free speech is because you hold classical liberal values sacred. It's a classical liberal value.
Okay, now that you've clarified that we're talking, when you say, let's stop using classical liberal and use Judeo-Christian instead. How about?
Well, it's not this. Hold on.
Yeah, I'm gonna let Wick go. I basically agree with everything he's about to say.
I object to that because Judeo.
Oh, he objects. You
yes.
fucking anti-Christian bastard.
Well, Judeo-Christianity contains a lot more than is contained in classical liberalism. Classical liberalism might be based off of and inspired by many Judeo-Christian values, but it also incorporates other things. And also, Judeo-Christian values there's a host more to that than just classical liberalism.
Your Judeo-Christian values does require a forefront to understanding of what Jesus Christ represents in the whole moral structure. So that's why I also wouldn't agree to it being qualified as
Let me read
such.
my $10 super chat while you process. And Caleb, thank you for the $10, Caleb, says woke for needs to also encompass a strong anti-institutional and selective acceptance of expertise in science, pro-IQ science but anti-epidemiology, pro-gender science until data is inconvenient, etc. Thank you for the $10. Not sure I agree, but I appreciate the money. But yeah, so I think Judeo-Christian is a way of sneaking in a lot of concepts by agreeing us. Like I just don't find that helpful.
Okay, fine. It comes down to a. Go ahead.
At the risk of opening the Jordan Peterson wormhole, one of my favorite Petersonisms was that essentially what I'm talking about when I say classical liberal values is the flowering of the Judeo-Christian tradition.
Yes, I agree.
You know, when the founders came, they were a collection of Christians, and like me, I'm a deist, so Christians and deists, and what they did is they took this value that the divine is the individual, and everyone must be treated as an individual.
Yes.
And then what they did is they said, what if we have the greatest political experiment of all time, and we take the greatest minds of our generation, and we sit and we don't rush it because we have time. We think for months, and we come up with a system of government that is designed in every way to honor that principle. That that there are individuals with rights worth honoring. There is
Right. All
natural
right. We agree on
law
this.
worth-
We agree. We agree. We agree. We agree.
It's not exactly Judeo-Christian because
Fine.
it's not the Bible, but that's what I mean when I say.
I agree. Okay. Now we're talking about. Okay. I understand what we're talking. I'm talking about the same thing.
I think in that vein, like you have to have a little wiggle room. Like speech is tricky, right? Like I think we both agree if someone was trying to use the power of the government to silence people because they criticize Israel, that's a problem.
Is woke. That's woke.
So Trump is woke.
would strike,
Do you agree that that's woke, Ryan? Because that's
that would strike me as woke. If you're
Okay.
if you're using a racial or collectivist grievance to stifle free speech on behalf of Israel, that would strike me as woke.
okay. Well, there we go. We agree.
But
There's
in
nothing
a-
more to argue about. Congratulations.
In a conversation, though, there's a little bit of a difference, right? When you're not using governmental power, like you've got to. I think you can have a disagreement and even say that you think someone's saying something inappropriate without stifling the value of free speech. I don't know exactly what Murray said, so I'm at a bit of a disadvantage.
Well, I posted a 3-minute clip that went viral, and James Lindsay himself quote tweeted me and called me woke right for posting it. So Wick, if you want to, I'd be happy to pull up the clip. If it's a
Share the
3-minute
screen.
contest.
Share the
So
screen.
that
we'll watch
actually be very helpful.
Yeah, we
This
can
would
watch it.
be very
Yeah, just share
relevant.
the
I
screen.
f-
We'll watch it in here. We'll all watch it together.
well, hold on. While I find it, maybe bring up another point or something I can contend with.
Okay,
because I don't
while
have it
he's
bookmarked.
messing with that, like so.
I think just the thing that's important about getting this right now is that the left got cannibalized by wokeism.
I do think we still need that extra element of impact on society or irrational correlation, something there to sparse certain differences. I feel like if someone like Hitler existed, that canceling him and denying his ability to spread his message, I do think is reasonable. I really do think it's very reasonable. And but that would also qualify as wokeism under the claim made by PF. So
Like it just became rampant to the point where it almost became the dominant school of thought within the party and definitely
Correct.
cost them the election. On the right, this is new. It's emerging. And I think that there's different reasons why people use the term. A lot of people use woke.
that's why I feel like applying it to MAGA is so interesting, is because it's an awoken mindset that differentiates itself from the status quo of society, in that the current society and societal structure is completely corrupt, and its corruption is now after Donald Trump. So they woken up to a conclusion, an irrational conclusion without any kind of verifiable evidence, and it's based on a emotional standard too. So everything that I've said in regards to this conversation all concludes that I think MAGA is woke right, and I do think that hits the characterization a little bit better than pure identity politics and trying to silence people because of identity politics. I don't think that captures the full characterization of being woke. I just don't
right
think so.
because they want to hack MAGA or they want to score political points. But there are people, and I do think, for all my disagreements with them, James Lindsay is one of them, they're trying to call this out early because they don't want what happened to the left to happen to the right.
Yes, but they are but this okay. I think we should watch the Douglas Murray clip.
Share
I sent it to you, Wick.
Share your screen. Oh, you guys.
You want me to do it?
Either one. You can. You should
I don't
be
want
able
to.
share.
I have a lot of deeply unsavory illegal shit on my computer that I want
You
to
think
show
I
up.
don't? Okay, DM it to me.
Don't have a vouch moment.
I sent it to you. Yeah.
Okay, let me bring it up. I'm gonna pause it right here. It's a 3-minute clip. We'll watch it.
3-minute
We'll have
clip. Played at
thoughts.
1.25 or whatever. Or yeah, whatever speed. Yeah.
Okay, clicky, so we can all see CE.
Yep.
Here, I'll just
Mm-hmm.
adjust those front and center. Well,
And
you don't see
just
it on
for
my-
context, real
okay.
quick, just for context.
I think this dude cooked the ever living Christ out of Joe Rogan and Dave Smith.
Dave Smith is talking about Paul Wolfowitz. Paul Wolfowitz was the secretary or the deputy defense secretary under Donald Rumsfeld. Okay, and that's basically all. And Paul Wolfowitz is Jewish. That's basically what you need to know for this clip.
Okay, let's watch the clip and see what happens.
When your family's going every which way, share your morning at Bob Evans. Try our new chocolate strawberry farmer.
To attribute American foreign policy in the last 40 years to Paul Wolfowitz and Dick Pearl is knowingly or otherwise to encourage a conspiracy that has very obvious legs. And I just urge you not to do it.
Okay, let me respond to this a little bit. First of all, it is not at all saying that these guys therefore just control everything. I'm just pointing out what a four-star general claimed, where plans originated, and that they ended up being implemented. That doesn't mean that they were the absolute ruler or arbiter of what was going to happen. But again, I got to say, for you to say that I can't bring up the neoconservative...
I never said you couldn't.
Okay, let me just... Right, but the implication is that I'm unwittingly giving fertile ground to some, like, Jew-hating conspiracy if I bring up a guy who's got a Jewish last name who was a consequential person in our government. This is, like, identical to the arguments of the woke left. That would just be like, oh, if you even say something, if you bring up the crime rate in Chicago, you're basically a bigot because other people could take this and run with it.
Come on.
No, you come on. What's the argument?
If you said to me...
I said a four-star general said something, and there's no... What's the response?
If you said to me, or somebody said to me, don't you think that some people are running the global financial system? And I said, possibly. And I said, who do you think it is? And they said, the Rothschilds. I think I'd be right in saying there was something a bit off about the character of the person doing that, because it seemed like they were playing to some kind of lazy old trope. And I think similarly that if you give the implication that a cabal of people, particularly, and you should be really careful about this because of the people who come up underneath you, if you give the implication that these cabals exist and you decide to elevate the Jews or people with Jewish names in it and then play down the non-Jews, I can tell you, you will be opening up a world of madness.
But am I really playing down the non-Jews? I mean, go look at the stuff that I said about Obama, about George W. Bush.
You said Middle East policy is Dick Pearl and Paul Wolfowitz, and I said,
no. I mean, this is why I'm saying this is a woke leftist tactic. I literally just mentioned that a four-star general said this. I'm quoting him, and now you're telling me that this is the same thing.
Don't pretend to me that when you quote somebody, it's a totally arbitrary thing you just pluck out of the air. You decide
I'm not arguing that it's arbitrary. I'm saying I'm using the quote for a reason. I was connecting it to an argument.
And I'm saying to you,
I'm getting fertile ground to Jew haters to mention that.
I think that when you decide to elevate what is a conspiracy of people who are overthrowing the governments of various countries, some of which haven't been overthrown and others of which have, but by the way, were not overthrown by American dominance, certainly not in Syria. And then you say that the people who are doing it are these people with Jewish names. I think you should be more judicious than that, because you probably know what bubbles up underneath you online by now. To attribute...
Never have I seen more...
Yeah, I don't think that would qualify under woke politics. See, that's why I have an issue with his definition, because it doesn't have that extra layer. There can be, I've already said this, a matter of fact, I've said this earlier, there can be a distinction between properly equating someone who utilizes a identity to come to very improper conclusions, and then someone else utilizing an identity to come up with proper conclusions. So both can exist. And just because you say that one version is improper and another one is proper, hopefully I'm making sense. I smoked a little bit. But just because you said one person is utilizing it just similar to another person utilizing it improperly, when someone says you can't talk about black people because you criticize a black person, it does not equate it to someone going like, yes, the framework of how you're deducting or how you're kind of making your argument is relatively similar, more not equatable. There's a term, something that's just much more grounded towards a realistic interpretation of what the person is doing.
Wokeness jam-packed into a 3-minute clip. Oh, it's kind of weird if you bring up a guy with a genuine discourse on an important subject, one needed to be talked about, and Douglas Murray with his woke identity politics comes in and says, it's just weird that you're doing that. I'm questioning your character. This is the kind of soft cancel culture bullying tactics that is a textbook tactic of the woke left. There's no criticism of classical liberalism in there. The important thing that makes someone's woke is that nonsense from Dougie.
I completely disagree with you.
That's a very interesting clip to have selected. I guess the question I would have is, if we're going to label that woke,
yeah,
how does one ever push back against, like, if you think that somebody is saying something inappropriate or doing something that you either find offensive or you think is, just not the sort of thing they should be saying? Like, how would you ever go about doing that?
Because, depends. Because I'm a classical liberal, as you pointed out, I believe that when it comes to the free exchange of ideas on controversial topics, almost none of it is relevant. I don't give a fuck if people are offended on the most controversial topic that we're talking about. Jordan Peterson 101. You can't think without risk being offensive, or you can't think without risk being offensive. So any kind of you shouldn't say that or whatever. Now, if someone is very clearly trafficking in lies, and you call them out for that. So if someone says something that they know to be untrue, that is where you say, okay, now this is bullshit, and now we're going to exclude you from the conversation because you're knowingly poisoning the discourse with false information. But until someone is willing to say that you're a liar, calling someone an anti-Semite or a racist or a communist or whatever fucking label you want to call someone, is not a valid, is just an attempt to silence discussion on an important issue.
I think that steps a bit too far for me because free speech cuts both ways, right? Like if you respect the value of free speech, you have to respect the value that people can say things you disagree with, they can say things that you find offensive, and that applies to you and it applies to them. But that would also apply to people saying, I find that offensive, right? Like it applies to everything. So it only becomes...
And I would call those people woke, and I would say, you're free to say that, and I'm not trying to censor you. And me calling Douglas Murray woke right is not my attempt to censor him.
So anyone criticizing Dave Smith in that regard is being woke?
Don't like sharing your pine.
Yeah, I completely disagree with PF's interpretation here. When you play video game, I need a really powerful...
Yeah, he's bringing up
a person who's Jewish, and I determine that this is based off nefarious conclusion on your holistic idea of what Jewish people are. That makes me woke? That's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous conclusion to make.
That's wild. That's wild. But go on.
Well,
explain. Let him explain.
Hold on. No, wait. Hold on. I'm going to address what Wick said. Because what is the implication that when you say that, Wick? I'm noticing that Dave Smith, a guy who talks about Israel, I wonder why Jews would come up in discussions about the Jewish state. So the implication that you're putting, even in the tone that you just said, was the wokest thing you could possibly do, which is, I wonder why Dave Smith constantly talks about Jews. Maybe he's a racist. That's the soft woke bullying cancel culture.
So we can't
bullshit.
ever ask if someone's
racist. Maybe he's a racist. That's the soft woke bullying cancel culture.
So we can't ever ask if someone's racist? Can we never interrogate whether or not someone is a racist?
No, Kathy Newman, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying calling someone a racist for bringing up something that is self-evidently not racist, like the fact that Deputy Defense Secretary Paul Wolfowitz has a Jewish last name, which wasn't even the fact, that he just named that person about something far more consequential. That is woke. To say, well, are some people racist?
Okay, well, let me. I think that's a very convenient cover, I think, for never being able to call out someone for anti-Semitism, ever. Because if you even... Because again, that was 3 minutes of a longer conversation, if I may finish.
That's what the woke left would say about.
No.
Go ahead.
The woke left would say anti-Semitism's good, actually, and we should do it more. But that's another conversation.
But I'm talking in the context of like black people. Like if you criticize black culture, right, whatever that means, it's like, hey, it's not good that, for example, it seems to be a norm that if you speak proper English as a black person, that makes you somehow less black. Like that's bad. That's stupid. That's fucking lame.
It is.
Oh, but Paul's white, and Paul, it's odd that a white person is criticizing a black cultural phenomenon. I wonder why
you did it every day.
Implication being I'm racist.
If every day you came on my show and every day you wanted to talk about, it's weird that 15% of the population engages in 50% of the crime, and every day, every single day, you brought up those statistics you wanted to talk about. I'm giving you an example, right?
Yep.
If I don't think it would be woke or even inappropriate to wonder out loud, hey, that's really weird that you keep bringing up black people.
I agree. 100% agreed.
And in the context
this has nothing to do with Israel.
In the context of that conversation,
yes, it does. He's making a very
the reason that they got that conclusion, as I recall, was that
he's making a very proper conclusion. The conclusion is that if behavior elicits a potential perception that you're against an identity based off either emotional or very biased notions, then calling that out is not woke. Not at all. I don't know Dave Smith enough to insinuate the idea of him being potentially freaking anti-Semite. But considering the current culture of so many people who are becoming anti-Semitic and really hating Jewish people, matter of fact, we had a terrorist attack recently where people were attacking Jewish people, and freaking Kanye West hates Jewish people too, and we don't even got to talk about Candace Owens. Then you understand why, when certain things match a certain type of rhetoric, you can see why they would come to certain type of conclusions.
Murray was concerned that Rogan was having on a series of people that were saying things like, Churchill's the villain in World War II, and we don't need to litigate that, but like the concern was that he was, rightly or wrongly, and I've not watched all these episodes, so I'm not taking on that he was platforming one side of the anti-Semitism, World War II revisionism, and not the other side. And
Okay, that's a valid critique.
critiquing that behavior
Yeah.
seems very fair game.
100%.
Okay, so you don't take issue with Douglas Murray's position on the whole.
No, I agree with Douglas Murray on that. That Joe Rogan should have Ben Shapiro on ASAP. He should host a debate with Dave Smith. He should bring all of the pro-Israel people on his podcast, and there should be more discourse between them. And Daryl Cooper, I think, I've listened to Daryl Cooper's podcast, and people who have listened to Fear and Loathing in Jerusalem. You know, the whole that he's an anti-Semite is so laughably beyond ridiculous that only someone who is ignorant of the person would say that. But I do agree he's a coward for not being willing to debate a real historian about his claim that Churchill was the primary villain in World War II. I think, okay, that's evidence that Daryl Cooper is cowardly and intellectually insecure. If he's willing to go on Tucker Carlson and say that, but not have a debate with someone who's informed on it. That's not a woke critique. That's a very valid critique of you don't know what you're talking about, as evidenced by your fear of engaging in a real discourse. That's completely different from saying, Daryl Cooper, he's an anti-Semite, so therefore he shouldn't be listened to. It's like, whether or not someone is racist, that is not making any claim about the validity of their truth claims. Totally irrelevant. They're terrible. There are truths that are racist. It's like,
no, I agree. I don't disagree with this.
You can be a terrible person to be right.
Correct, right. And the woke issue is implying that when you are having a genuine, non-racist discussion about like the deputy defense secretary who happens to be named Paul Wolfowitz, and the context was the entire conversation about the conflict in the Middle East with Israel, which is probably the most like controversial topic of the last 2 years. So the claim that you're like, well, but if someone brings it up all the time, it's like, well, children are constantly being killed every day. I think it's fair to point this out and bring up the role that like Israel has in influencing our politics.
But the problem I have.
And let me be clear.
Hold on,
be very clear.
Be clear real quick that I got a couple super chats and then I'll let then I have a response and Ryan can respond. And apparently you're either Artie Lang or Homelander, one of the two. But anyway.
Artie Lang, is that? No. Sorry, continue.
No, I wanted you to finish your point, and then I was going to read super.
That was my point. My point was I noticed at the end of that sentence I was getting worked up.
Okay, that's fine.
And I would like to acknowledge that.
No, we're all. This is fun. It's
emotional
a fun
instability.
We can.
I'm tired of seeing dead children on my timeline all the time. That's what.
Great. I mean, no one likes dead children.
Follow Wick.
$20 from Crash Out or Cash Out to say I dislike the debate. The origin of being woke stems from the black communities being aware/woke to understand the now based on the past. Sociology and psychology effects adopted by the mainstream pop, especially feminism and LGBTQ. Well, thank you for the $20 and the $5 more from the same person. Critical race theory was considered woke, but was shut down because it makes certain groups feel guilty because ultimately it made people aware. #woke. Thank you for the $5. I just think we have a different definition of woke. I think that while you might be right on
woke as hell.
I think he might be right on the origin of the word itself, right? But words shift in meaning, and I think that as it was adopted by the more mainstream culture, it did shift in meaning, and I think that's where we are now.
The meaning did shift, but it translated to a broader issue, or it translated to a broader understanding, but it still had core elements that you can apply it to. I feel like words do change. I mean, unless it's a completely different term. Like there are slang terms that exist out there, right? That has nothing to do with its intended original meaning. Like that's fine. But usually a lot of these words are just a derivative version of the primary definition.
Now and then Caleb, a member for 1 month. Thank you for being a tier 1 member for 1 month. Ask PF Jung if Churchill was the main villain.
If Churchill was the main villain?
Yeah, was Churchill.
No, I tend to think the guy that committed industrial mass extermination was probably the main villain. If I had to put my money on it, Stalin up there too is pretty bad.
It's funny. I was actually on Tim Pool. Yeah. I was actually on Tim Pool, and I asked him a similar question. He struggled to answer that question. He was like, I don't really know.
To the degree I get the point again that Daryl Cooper was making is that Winston Churchill did not act in a way that could have maybe restrained the war, which I don't necessarily know is true or not. The fact that Daryl Cooper is too much of a coward to debate it with a real historian makes me think it's not true. But fine, let him say it, and then let me and other people come on and say he's a coward for not willing to debate someone on it.
Yeah, but all right, I don't know the full context, but walk with me here. If someone makes a claim that is obviously or unprovable, or at the very least has not been proven as a legit claim, but it's a claim that exists beyond the current understanding of the status quo of history, right? If someone makes that claim, continuously makes the claim, and then tries to run it back, making it seem like it's more nuanced. But they're with the way they act, basically tells a story that coincides with the label that people apply to the person as being either anti-Semitic or some other kind of racist slur or whatever, or something type of Semitic or ist or whatever. Then at that point, you can see why that is a drawable conclusion, though. Actions speak louder than words. We say that quite frequently. So you not being able to call someone based off circumstantial evidence and character and actions of that person on what they are versus what they say, I feel like that is equally as bad as someone just being woke based off your definition. You were trying to prevent them from being characterized as they are.
That's a much more effective way to address false information than implying that they're anti-Semitic or something like that.
Yeah, but again, like the problem I have mainly with your contention of this clip specifically is that it's in the context of a larger conversation and the larger body of work that Dave Smith has engaged in, and I think it's not necessarily woke or even inappropriate to ask that question. To ask, is Dave Smith engaged in kind of this dog whistling, soft anti-Semitism? Now the answer might be no, right? But I don't think it's a crime or even inappropriate to ask,
yes,
especially if you're
fine.
asking him directly, right?
The funny thing about it is that the critique that Murray had would also be of Smith and of I his name now, the historian you mentioned,
Daryl Cooper.
Daryl Cooper is another like classic woke playbook, which is say things publicly, but you never debate. You say you want to be treated like a public intellectual, but you will not expose yourself to the scrutiny and the rigor that is expected of a public intellectual, so your ideas are never tested. And that
honestly, that is more woke than what PF said. And when I described it, that perfectly encapsulates that idea. It's having this new nuance, not even nuance, this new awoken understanding of the current status quo of society and history, but not able to kind of confirm it with solid evidence or moral grounds and foundations. It sounds like that's more woke than what you're claiming, PF.
That was really Murray's issue that he was raising
100%.
in that debate. And so I think you have to have a little bit of a zone of discretion. Like I see what you're saying. I think there are certainly instances of somebody saying, you can't speak to this because you're not a black man, or you can't speak to this because you're insufficiently oppressed, where I would agree with you. I think that you've got to have some zone where people can talk about the idea that I am a little concerned that you keep bringing up the Jews. I am a little concerned that you keep saying that women are inferior.
Of course,
like maybe we should talk
about
that.
Of course. There's absolutely space for that. I would not say that by itself is woke. Everything needs to be put into context. And I'm saying the reason I selected that clip, and the reason it went viral, it wouldn't have gone viral if there wasn't some element of truth to it, is that...
I don't agree with that at all. Things can go viral for complete lies. That's... No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
In that instance, it was very, very... Do you disagree that what Douglas Murray was doing... He wasn't asking... He didn't say, Dave, you talk about Israel a lot. You talk about Israel a lot. And I just want to know, like, do you believe in Jewish conspiracies? Do you, what do you think of the whatever? You could ask him all those kinds of things in the spirit of genuinely getting information out of him. That's not what Douglas Murray was doing. Douglas Murray was implying that because Dave Smith said the last name of a Jew, Wolfowitz, it somehow might be trafficking in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. That's what it's an assertion. It's not a question.
Conversation.
Huh?
Wasn't that like hour 2 of a conversation?
That was in the last, probably like 20 minutes of the, I don't know how long it was, 2 hours, something like that.
Yeah, so I mean, that's what I mean. Like, I think by the time you get to that point in the conversation, I think
Did you watch the debate?
I watched parts of it. I wouldn't say I watched the whole thing.
I did.
Okay.
I hasn't like I didn't do it yesterday, right? So and it was a long conversation, so fair enough. But
from my recollection, by the time they got into like the hour mark, there was quite a lot of conversation about whether or not people were
sorry.
So anyway, the Jews are doing the. Oh, sorry.
Oh shit, Wick's back.
No. I don't know what's wrong with my internet. I need to get that fixed. I apologize. It will be back up for YouTube and Twitch momentarily. I see the red light on. It's going to go to green any second now. I am connected to the internet again. I'm glad it's very brief, but it's still annoying.
True. We do have to pause the discussion because the stream goes out as well.
Yes, I am sorry about that. My apologies. My bad. They got me again. Hamas did it this time. Last time it was Zog. This time it was
That's
Hamas.
fair.
Okay.
Let's be
And
radical
they're in
centrist here,
balance.
right? Both
They're in
sides.
balance.
Both sides
No,
are angry about
I
this.
find it a little strange that you brought up Hamas just like
Yeah, that's interesting.
Isn't
Yeah.
it weird how I bring up terrorists when they terrorize
a
my
little
internet?
weird.
A little
you know,
bit.
I don't,
Yeah, oh,
it's
interesting that
sus.
you say that. Anyway, what were you were saying? I
I've
asked
seen,
if you had seen
it.
the whole
we were
podcast.
2 hours
Yeah.
of the 2 hours of the thing.
Yeah.
So I guess again, that clip being at the end, I think. Look, you can disagree with Douglas Murray's assessment, but I don't think it is out of the blue, nor is it woke, nor is it.
Of course, it's not out of the blue.
I don't think it's inappropriate for Douglas Murray to imply that, hey, Dave Smith, I think you're maybe a little bit anti-Semitic here, based on the.
Okay, that's
the
the wokest thing I've heard you say, Wick. That's ridiculous.
Are you
The other
being
thing is-
paid to defend Dave Smith here? What's
Are you
wrong with
being
criticism?
paid by the woke right to say that that Dave Smith is an anti-Semite, noted
Do you
Jew
have a
Dave Smith?
secret master, some secret society that
I just think
You can be Jewish and be anti-Semitic. You can be black. You can be racist. You can be Asian. You can be anti-Asian. You can be gay. You can be homophobic. I mean, you're just playing into the whole woke right stuff that we've been talking about. I'm not gonna lie, PF. You sound woke.
I think I mean, to be clear, there's a lot of things that Douglas Murray said on that podcast I agree with, even on the topic of Israel. Like, for example, that when you see all of the devastation in the images of Gaza, you have to remember that Hamas puts ammunition and shit in a lot of those houses. And so when a single missile strike comes down, it hits one house and it sets off a daisy chain. And that is in part why the destruction is as significant as it is. Hamas is as bad as Israel. There's no fucking disputing that. I would not ever say that, okay? Or not ever say that Hamas is justified. I'm not far left. That's the woke left bullshit, right? You cannot criticize the IDF if you're not also willing to criticize Hamas. You lose all your moral high ground there. So, you know, if I haven't properly given that perception,
Okay. Yeah, no, you're
that's my
fine. You don't.
apologies.
We're not. This isn't a struggle session. You don't have to. I condemn Hamas, right? We get it.
That's
yeah, we're not struggle
He has
session.
to.
That's woke.
He has
Yeah,
to.
that's woke. Condemn, yeah,
but
requiring people to condemn Hamas is woke.
I want to take it back just a little bit from this specific moment and go to the more
Okay.
conceptual. Candace Owens, do you consider her woke right?
You want ads that drive results. That's why we built Roku ads.
But I just had a protein shake and it's making me bloated. Man, 2 scoops of that protein be killing me, man.
No, I generally don't use the term woke right unless it's talking about the people who I described fit my definition, using race politics or identity politics to silence others through hard or.
Your definition sucks, PF. No offense. You're a cool guy from what I've seen on social media. But your definition's ass. So, yeah, the whole thing about people getting silenced based off identity politics is way too shallow of a definition. It just is.
Soft means. And does Candace Owens do? Candace Owens is a grifter. Candace Owens is a bit of a loon. Is she an anti-Semite? You know, even if she was, I think calling her that just reduces your ability to leverage more useful criticism down the line. So it's the same reason that even if I thought someone was genuinely racist, or even if I thought someone was engaging in hate speech, I wouldn't call it hate speech. Just on
What about a
principle.
genuine separatist? Like, I mean, like someone who's actually calling for races should live separately. Well, that woke.
That's pretty woke.
Okay, but that's not a speech. It's not. Let's say they're very polite and cordial in conversation. They'll let you say whatever they want. They just think that there should be a white nation and a black.
Again, like, look, this is there's sort of a the nature of this conversation is somewhat fraught because essentially we're debating something that is not entirely, but fundamentally comes down to vibes, which is what is the best way to use the word woke? And there is no that's a question that cannot be answered through logical debate. It's only through it's like if 2 football teams are going to play each other and we're debating on who's going to win. It's like we can debate all day long, but ultimately we don't know until the football teams play out. And so I'm making the case that the term the woke or the woke right should be reserved for people who are censoring people and silencing free speech.
All right, now you're changing your claim from a definition to a agreed upon definition, a prescribed definition to now a definition that that is more applicable based on how the term is used. Which, as of right now, being woke is basically a slur. The right was able to co-opt it and turn it into a slur. So, Do I think it would be in the best interest of this slur to be used in a very specific manner? I think there's a lot of validity to that in particular, because you don't want something like this, a term that has pretty much full negative connotations, to be commonly used in everyday situations, regardless of how you understand the concept of where it came from and how it applies to more more wokish type things. The best way. I don't want to kind of dig my head too much into that. Ultimately, if you narrow down the term, make a very easy definition to apply universally that cannot be argued, then you'll be able to use it as a weapon, as well as not diminish, but control its usage on everyday discourse. Because the moment the term woke is utilized, that completely can curve a conversation. So I get the intentionality, but I'm gonna see how they respond before I come to
speech in the name of identity politics, which is what the principal problem was on the left. If a black nationalist said, I want to separate from the United States, as equals, which is what Malcolm X advocated, for example, would I call that woke? I would say I'm sure that accompanies a lot of woke beliefs, but that's actually not the primary issue. The primary issue would be if people like that said, you can't, criticizing me as racist. If someone said, I want to separate, and if you criticize me for my racial separation beliefs, then you're racist, then that would be woke in the way that is more consequential than just having an idea that I disagree with.
Here's my problem with the way that you're using the term. And I agree with you, by the way. This is a brand new term. We've kind of invented it recently and evolved it recently. So it's not like there's some objective metric where we can decide the definition needs to be X. Like, I don't think that's going to
correct. Yeah, which is why it's not a debate. It's a genuine discussion. Even though I'm in.
No, we're debating. It's a debate. Don't worry.
Yeah, but it's not one of those debates.
When I use the word woke, what I'm really using,
it's not an Andrew Wilson or Jordan Peterson debate.
Is I'm identifying the sector I think should be excised from a political party so that I can join it. If the woke were kicked off the Democratic side, I'd still be a Democrat probably. If the woke right were kicked off the right, I'd be a lot more comfortable in conservative circles than I currently am. And the problem I have with your definition is it excises Douglas Murray, but keeps the KKK member. The KKK member is delighted to talk about anything, but he's not censoring anybody. He'd love to have a very candid conversation with you, but Douglas Murray is the problem, and I just don't see it. I think the people I'm trying to excise from the right are the fucking fringe lunatics who are.
I'm glad I listened, because I do think that is another very interesting point. So I already established the intentionality behind what PF is trying to do. Now that he's trying to create a definition for the term, I utilize the term woke left to differentiate the crazy lefties from the more rational, logical left Democrats and stuff, right? Matter of fact, I just watched a live regarding the Unfuck America tour, and a lot of those woke lefties I dislike a lot, right? If we are going to use it as a negative term that is basically coinciding a slur, then you might as well use the term so it co-opts the worst individuals from a specific political identity, right? You might as well, right? So I like what he's saying. Now, you would have to create a universal definition, though, that is easily to understand and can't be disputed, that will always work for the side against the left. Therefore, people on the right can't argue against the term being used as in a consistent manner. Now, of course, people are still going to be irrational, but it is what it is. I just threw a fumble. How do I throw a fumble? But ultimately, I want to see what he is able to create as a term to coincide the radical right as well. I mean, radical is also a term that you can use, but it's not really a slur, because people really, it doesn't hit the emotional receptors for the people on the right.
Are sneaking in total assaults on fundamental Judeo-Christian or classical liberal, whatever term we want to use, values,
Yeah.
that if they are allowed to fester on the right, will
Okay.
do to the
Let
right
me-
what they did to the left, which is destroy it from within.
Okay.
Summer savings are here at Going Gone by Dick's Sporting.
I need to get YouTube. I need to get YouTube Premium. I'm tired of these goddamn ads. Why? Oh, why?
We respond to this very directly. My ability to criticize the freaks on the right. The freaks on the right come in many different flavors, right?
What's your favorite?
Just because I call Rocky Road, just because I call actually, fuck, I couldn't think of Vanilla Ice. I don't know.
It's between Rocky Road and Butter Pecan. Butter Pecan is so good, but Rocky Road has all the other extra elements that makes it great. You need it's harder to find really good Rocky Road because you gotta have the perfect mixture of almonds and marshmallows, of chocolate covered almonds and marshmallows. Like you have to have the perfect mixture for it to be really good Rocky Road. Whereas Butter Pecan, I feel like you can't mess up Butter Pecan. I'll be honest. Just make sure
They're
it's
white, too.
buttery and pecan-y.
Just because I label, do you play video games at all? You know, League of Legends.
I never fell down that particular cesspit, but yes.
But you understand the concept, okay.
We're old enemies.
League of Legends. There's five different enemies on the enemy team. You play MOBAs. Okay. There's 5 different enemies. Each of them are different. I have one word, woke, to describe the Douglas Murrays, the people who say I can't criticize Israel or criticizing Israel or Judaism or any of that makes you an anti-Semite or it should be implied that you're an anti-Semite. That's one type of person on the freak right. The woke right is one subset of the freak right. Then there are the red pill manosphere people who just hate women. I wouldn't call them woke. I would call them just fucking dweebs and losers, among other things. Then there are the what's another faction on the right? The hardcore Christian fundamentalists. Are they woke? No, because woke is reserved for people who are censoring free speech. The Christian nationalists who, for example, want to use blasphemy laws to censor free speech, maybe I could call them woke, but they're...
See, that's why the definition I elicited before works perfect in this context. Because it's ultimately people who want to differentiate themselves from the understanding of the status quo of society and history. I'm gonna allow them to give every single definition, and then I'm gonna apply the woke term to every single one of them. So I'm gonna allow them to.
They're not really using race and identity politics; they're using religion to censor free speech.
Well, they're using
so
their
there are
identity
many
as religion to censor.
Yeah, okay, but then it's like, well, again, it's like, where are we going to draw the line about which identity,
well,
like Christianity versus race versus whatever?
If I may, and I'm sorry for cutting you off, but I think that.
So he said red pill. So Christian nationalists and and then the Douglas Murray type, right? Or the people who censor based off identity politics. So the way you can kind of encapsulate all three. So people who are red pill in the manosphere, their current understanding of society with the changing of sexual promiscuity and the differentiating roles of man and woman in current society, they want to break from that current understanding of society and want to either return or create a new landscape for society under the guise of some type of male superiority. So that is a woke mindset of the current societal structure and the current roles of man and woman. So again, you can qualify them as woke, especially if they use that in a way that honestly doesn't make sense. I don't need to go in super detail every single time. Okay, I'm tired. And then when it comes to Christian nationalists, again, they want to break away from the understanding of current society, which is not Christian nationalists, which is a mixed hodgepodge of a lot of different religious values that has some Christian principles, but it's not holistically based off only Christian principles. So they want to remove themselves from this more secular nation to a complete religious one. And that is a awoken mindset of the current status quo of society as well. And then, of course, the understanding that someone is potentially using identity or kind of speaking on a certain type of identity in a potentially wrong way and giving them a title or qualifications to assume a very negative characteristic. All of them are based on the idea of a newfound awoken mindset that differs from current societal status quo, and you want to ruin society and to support the new woken mindset that you're eliciting. That's why you're able to apply the woke term to so many lefties, because they want to do that by in a lot of different ways. Some more reasonable than others, but obviously the very pro black side that thinks that every black people can't be racist and all white people are racist. That is breaking away from a current societal understanding. All men are misogynistic and we're living under a patriarchy, stuff like that. Everybody's transphobic and homophobic, stuff like that. So again, you're able to kind of coincide all of these different things. Literally, they work bar for what you're saying, but on the other way. So yes, the term works completely. I think PF, you're too hell bent on the cancellation part. I'll watch a little bit more, then I'm gonna watch something else.
You should be.
This
It's
is
making a
going
great
to be
point.
helpful to the conversation. Might be why I define it more broadly than you. The use case that
Okay.
I see, or not the use case, but the usefulness of using it as a more broad term, because I think that my definition, collectivism and identitarianism, that often but not always use grievance politics in order to attack classical liberal values, it showcases a much more wider umbrella that we can point to the ways of thinking that influence the behavior that we see on the ground. So that censoring that you were talking about is the symptom, right? But I'm identifying the root of the problem.
Okay. Right to that point, I don't think that that's necessarily a problem. You can collectivism in and of itself is not bad. We're social creatures. Everyone agrees.
In a world where you've constantly been told what you can't.
The silence is glaring. And I bring it back.
Abide by laws to sacrifice some of our individual liberty to maintain the social order. That's what taxes are in a very basic sense. Do we disagree to that?
I think we agree. I think that there is an interplay between ideas like state, patriotism, support your family, support your community.
Yep, collective identity.
That's reflective loyalty. And then, particularly in the American tradition, the paramount, you could even call it like holy value that we place on the individual. And
Which I think is wrong. I think our emphasis on the individual is a fatal mistake that is causing the problems that we have.
I disagree.
You might be woke.
But I've said I'm woke center. Jordan Peterson said, what's the classic Jordan Peterson line? Your rights are my responsibilities. There's no such thing as rights without the equivalent responsibilities. This is a point made by Viktor Frankl, who was a Austrian Jewish psychiatrist who survived the concentration camps. Right? He said the Statue of Liberty should be supplemented by the Statue of Responsibility because you cannot have one without the other. And individual liberty is dependent upon collective responsibility. You don't have any rights unless you live in a system that protects those rights. And you have a collective responsibility to that system to ensure some level of individualism.
Does the government give you those rights?
The government protects them, or should. A functioning government does. I don't know what that means, give them to me.
You're talking about what you were saying is that your rights don't exist without a system that protects those rights. And I don't think that's necessarily true. While a system might violate, or individuals or groups might violate your rights, I think your rights still exist. Even if the First Amendment didn't exist, for example, in America, I think free speech would still be.
Rights can be inherent, but I do think there is a fundamental principle of enforcement that should be included in the conversation. That I think that's where PF is coming from. Because what is the value of right without a societal structure that can enforce and protect them, right? But you could also argue there's a foundational principle where these rights derive from that makes it okay, or it makes it reasonable why they need to be protected in the first place. So that's also like they kind of work hand in hand, right? They kind of work hand in hand.
Thing, and it'll still be worth fighting for. It'll still be a value.
I agree,
and a right.
But it would functionally not exist in a totalitarian free speech. If we lived in a censorship society, free speech would functionally not exist as a right. I would not have a right to come on and criticize the president.
You would have the inherent right, but it would be valueless because it's not protected, enforced, or embedded. but the right is principally that, and it is something you would fight for because it is. Can you argue that it is a moral? I'd have to kind of really think about human. That's when we start diving into the value of human nature and the. This is an interesting concept.
It would be limited, but it still exists to some extent.
Okay, fine. My point is, my issue with your definition, Wick, is that because you're going after what you believe is a symptom, I think your definition is too expansive.
The cause.
Excuse me, the opposite. Yes, you're going after the cause. And I'm saying there's actually a lot of value that you are laying at the cause. And it's better to focus on the downstream symptom that is the problem. Call that, woke right or whatever. Because then we can look at the cause and say, well, what are the valid points in this original cause that we could actually make use of?
Well,
if we call that the woke right, we excise everyone.
You took a slice of my cause and then you focused on that collectivism specifically, but it's not
Sure.
just collectivism. I don't
Fair.
disagree. Collectivism in and of and by itself is neutral, in my opinion. It's not good, it's not bad, it just is.
So is individualism. Yes.
Identitarianism, same thing, though I tend to eschew identitarianism for other reasons. It's only when it's combined, right, with this attack on what I consider classical liberalism. And let me define that for you pretty simply for the sake of this discussion. Free speech, free trade, free elections. I think that's pretty standard.
I fucking hate classical liberalism if that's how we define it. I like the flowering of the Judeo-Christian. Free trade is the sacred religious thing. God, well, I'm not dying for free trade, I'll tell you that.
I mean,
let me see if my definition aligned with the attack on classical liberalism. I feel like it does because there is a difference. There needs to be that line that differentiates the established understanding of where wokeness came from to establish a better society versus one that ruined society. And that line probably is the breaking away of classical liberalism. Potentially, I would have to really think about it to know for sure. Oh my goodness, I'm playing Madden while I do all this, so my brain is locked in. I just mossed someone with Malik Neighbors.
And you'll die.
I'll die for free speech.
Well, hold on. The problem is like if goods don't cross borders, troops eventually will. So you're more likely to die without free trade than you are with.
I wouldn't disagree with that.
I wouldn't include free trade. I'm a free trade guy, but I wouldn't include free trade in.
I'm not a free trade
definition. And the reason I wouldn't is because you talk about like root causes. What to me, what happened?
Very good conversation. If you want to watch the rest of it, feel free to go to Wick's channel. I have more things to react to for this stream. It was a good debate though. Good debate. Will I be able to get to the big beautiful bill? I don't know. But there's a hearing that I kind of want to watch. And then there's this race convo that I'm interested in. I'm not going to watch this PBS convo, so I'll probably spend the next few hours. Bro, I could not. Shout out Kai for being a streamer, bro. Maybe I could if I didn't have to work